3 years ago, if you told Canadians that agents of the Chinese Communist Party were operating police stations on Canadian soil, were cultivating a network of politicians and staffers in the last 2 federal elections, were intimidating the family of a former cabinet minister in this country, were helping to fund the political career of the prime minister of this country, and were buying off journalists, you would be laughed at as some sort of xenophobic conspiracy theorist. But all of that is true, and we know it to be true. In fact, the infiltration of Canada's democracy by the Chinese Communist Party is so bad that CSIS agents and other security officials had to take their concerns to the press, to journalists, and become whistleblowers because Justin Trudeau and his office have so far done nothing to stop this from happening. These agents have risked their entire careers and decades behind bars in order to warn Canadians about just how serious a threat this foreign interference really is. And it's also not just the Chinese Communist Party. The Indian government, as we now know as well, is also heavily involved in foreign interference operations inside our country. So is the Iranian government, and of course, so are the Russians. No self-respecting nation would allow itself to be put upon in such a reckless and dangerous way, but that is exactly what is happening in Canada. We are no longer seen as a trustworthy ally. Canada is excluded from new intelligence alliances, and we are laughed out of the room. Not to mention that the lives of millions of proud Canadians from diaspora populations have now been put at risk. Our next guest is one of Canada's leading investigative journalists whose work has been at the very front of uncovering this web of foreign interference operations inside our country. Drop a like in the video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this. Do you think that the Liberal government has been compromised by the CCP? Let me know in the comments, and let's get into it. So joining us now on the show is investigative journalist and best-selling author Sam Cooper. I should also say that Cooper is the founder of the investigative journalism outlet on Substack, The Bureau. You can find a link to that in the description of this video. Cooper's reporting has been at the very front of uncovering this web of election interference operations in our country, which has imperiled the democracy of Canada and has challenged our national security. It involves politicians all the way up to the federal government. So Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Harrison.
So your reporting really blew up into the national conscience really in November of 2022 when sources came to you not alleging actually, that they had information that the Toronto consulate, the Chinese Toronto consulate, was funding and cultivating a network of 11 federal candidates in the 2019 election, including staffers. Since then, of course, this has become a major political scandal causing major headaches for the Trudeau government. Now, there's been a lot of reporting since that first major story from you and from other journalists detailing just how deep this interference operation really goes. And we'll get into the details, but first, why don't you just summarize what we know to be going on in this country, what these election interference operations are looking like, and who's involved?
Right, yeah. So it is incredibly complex stuff. What my continuing investigations have found that it's not just the 2019 and 2021 federal election that were targeted with this network of preferred candidates and staffers, that some of them are wittingly, allegedly attached to the consulate and intelligence influence, some of them unwittingly. But the key here is that my continuing reporting has showed that this is not just focused on the federal level or a Toronto consulate. It's across the country and from the top to the bottom of our democracy, municipal, provincial, federal, even leadership contests. But to quickly summarize, yes, you're correct. My reporting in November kicked off this run of reporting that the Globe and Mail later joined. And the allegations are serious. As you said, 11 candidates in the Toronto area only allegedly were supported clandestinely by a network that included clandestine funding. And the channeling allegedly between the Toronto consulate, undercover officials, and these preferred candidates and their networks and their campaigns included a community group that I have further reported is under investigation in Chinese police station activity. So that's the 2019 election allegations. Of course, a number of politicians were named. There are lawsuits going on, but we'll be able to hear from politicians in the inquiry whether they were wittingly or unwittingly tied up in what I have reported is Xi Jinping's United Front influence networks that are rampant in Canada. But to just summarize this answer, 2021, I and the Globe and Mail have also reported that this election interference stemming from consulates in Canada extends to the point where China wants to see a Liberal government elected. As the Globe and Mail was first to report, I have reported as well. There's no question here. CSIS has documents that says the Liberal Party is favored, and yet China is attempting to support other candidates and other parties, especially the Conservatives, because China wants to see, as the Globe and Mail first reported, a minority government led by the Liberals so that China can simply fulfill its objectives and secretly influence our politicians to take stances that would favor China and be to the detriment of Canada's policy. So I'll end by saying those are the main allegations that this Foreign Interference Commission is mandated to look into. But I have done many reports since this summer and since launching the Bureau on a continued collection of CSIS documentation that shows that it is across the country and from top to bottom of our political system. And the three main parties are very targeted. Again, it's the Liberals mostly, but it's anyone that matters politically in Canada, including leadership contests, is what I've reported based on documents that no one will be able to refute.
So we'll get into the leadership contest stuff because I think that's really important. And of course, also the EDA politics, this local EDA politics, which clearly can be manipulated to get the best outcome for hostile countries. But you've touched on the inquiry here, and I want to get into that a little bit because originally the federal government didn't want to have an inquiry. They were pushing that off, trying to avoid any real investigation into what's going on. Trudeau even appointed David Johnston as special rapporteur, who also kind of discredited your reporting in the Global News I found in his report. But this federal inquiry into election interference, it's limited in scope, right? This is not going to be this all-encompassing investigation into what's really going on. That's something I've noticed that you've been touching on, that this is not really what is going to solve this problem.
That's right. I think that, a good thrust of reporting in Canada right now, not just from me, is that the mandate, again, of this inquiry only looking into the 2019 and 2021 elections and whether there was an interference, that's much too narrow. We can go a lot further into why it's much too narrow, but we've already seen in reporting that the Liberal Party will have access to all the evidence, which will not include their cabinet privileged communications, which would be the type of documents that would tell the Canadian public, what are the key questions here? Did Justin Trudeau and the chief staffers in his office know, were they warned by CSIS's director that some of their candidates could be under the influence of foreign powers, that probably the allegations could include some of your fundraisers are directly involved with the Chinese government? And then, as I've said, there will be no contesting that Justin Trudeau has been China's favored candidate. And so does he turn a blind eye to these CSIS allegations because it's benefiting his party? And furthermore, as I've reported, does his government fail to implement reforms to foreign interference laws recommended by a bipartisan intelligence review panel since 2019? Do they not do those actions? Again, because perhaps it could make their major donors in China or perhaps even Iran, other countries, angry. So we could talk for a long time on why some people are questioning the mandate already. Another issue is who has intervener status. Can people that face serious allegations of being threat actors for China see all the evidence and learn what they don't know? Could they even, through their lawyers, inform China of some of this evidence? So we could talk for a long time, but I think it's suffice to say there are problems that this inquiry already, some people I think are getting the sense that it just looks like David Johnston Part 2. And I won't go into the many ways where Mr. Johnston's report was deeply flawed and missed all the evidence. All we need to do is read a Substack from Aaron O'Toole, the former Conservative leader who evidence now proves was attacked by China. The day before the Johnston report came out, Mr. O'Toole reported on his Substack, this is a whitewash. And he was right. It gets a lot worse, I believe. But I think what I'm trying to say is Canadians are right to say, okay, we're going to hear more here, but it already looks like we won't hear enough in these upcoming hearings.
So let's just touch a little bit more into this Trudeau Foundation stuff, because it's remarkable. It involves Justin Trudeau, it involves David Johnston, you know, and even Morris Rosenberg, who cleared the federal government of any serious election tampering or any concerns in his report. Morris Rosenberg was a CEO of the Trudeau Foundation. David Johnston was also involved with the Trudeau Foundation, and yet the Trudeau government's first response was to hire David Johnston to be the special rapporteur. There's such a clear conflict of interest. And furthermore, there's been reporting since that Trudeau was briefed on these threats, that in fact he did know that the Canadian security CSIS and Canadian security establishment were concerned about these networks. So it looks very dirty in a way. It looks as though this goes all the way up to Justin Trudeau. Talk a little bit about the Trudeau Foundation aspect of this, because I think that has also become a little bit lost since it first really came into the news cycle.
Sure. For your listeners and viewers, we could talk a lot about how United Front influence operations work, how China has a Ministry of State Security officers in all its consulates in Canada who use proxy agents to get donations into Canadian leaders. Again, this isn't just the Liberal Party. They're targeting lots of influential people in Canada, but the Globe and Mail was first on a report that I can confirm I had the same intelligence. It was only a single source. I didn't report it. It was a single source. The Globe and Mail reported a single source. I can confirm I believe that source is very credible. And so I'll confirm that I believe the Globe and Mail was accurate, that the Chinese consulate was captured on a CSIS wiretap asking a very wealthy, influential business person, I'm not sure how he made his wealth, who comes from northern China. He was asked, can you get a donation into the Justin Trudeau Family Foundation, right? This is around 2012, 2013. What this is indicating, according to CSIS's wiretaps and beliefs, is that they believe China wanted Justin Trudeau elected. They wanted Justin Trudeau to be the Liberal Party leader. Justin Trudeau was their candidate. Okay, and something in the nature of a couple 100,000, maybe more, maybe less. There's questions around how much money actually that was promised flowed to the foundation, goes again through this process. The consulate says proxy person. Let's just call them proxy person with unclear sources of income. Can you donate to our prime minister through this foundation? And it happened. This is what CSIS heard on a wiretap. This is the evidence they have. Rather, intelligence. CSIS can't prosecute. This sounds very dirty, doesn't it? Canada doesn't have the laws in place to say, well, this could look like a bribe from the Chinese Communist Party. But let's step back from a second. The Trudeau Foundation is very clearly one of these sort of very connected to the Liberal Party entities that may give a little of the appearance of distance, so you can have a David Johnston or a Morris Rosenberg come in and do a report and look like it's arm's length, but it's not. It's connected to Trudeau. It's connected to the Liberal Party. As we saw, there's all kinds of warm family skiing relationships going on.
I've known the Governor General since I was a kid, from visiting him and his daughters when he was principal of McGill, to spending time on the ice or the slopes at their family home in the Laurentians.
The Trudeau Foundation, I'm telling your listeners, Harrison, is a direct target of Chinese influence operations. I have so much more evidence on these kinds of questions, but I believe it was proven in the Globe and Mail breaking that story, which was followed up very well by reporters in Montreal. And I want to say I have the same intelligence information that a wiretap established. China wanted Justin Trudeau to be their guy, and they wanted what's called a white gloves in Chinese culture to flow that donation.
So obviously there are people involved in the security side of this country at CSIS and RCMP who are trying to do something about this, who want this country to be safe from these hostile nations. And they're having to go to you. They're having to go to journalists because they're not getting anywhere with politicians. That to me speaks volumes about the fact that at the political level, nobody is really that interested in trying to stop this from happening.
I believe that's proven. It's a circumstantial case. It's probably a slam dunk case in evidence and documents somewhere. Again, CSIS can't bring those documents out and do any prosecutions. But what I would like, your listeners to lean on most heavily, my reporting for the Bureau on the NSI COP panel. This is the bipartisan intelligence review body created by Justin Trudeau to report to Justin Trudeau on important intelligence and give him recommendations. They gave him a report in 2019 saying, look, Australia has a foreign actor influence transparency scheme. They have other laws. They've been targeted in the same deep way as New Zealand has by China's political influence operations. They overcame in Australia, quote, willful blindness from very elite political, academic, business leaders, and they put in these new laws. This is right in the report. And Justin Trudeau was told, please take action in 2019. His government has not done so. As I've reported, his government was also warned about threat activity from India. His government was warned about these illegal Chinese Communist Party repatriation operations. Since 2015, Mr. Trudeau has been warned, and yet he hasn't put these laws that were recommended to him in place that will protect our diaspora communities from being surveilled and harassed from foreign intelligence and crime networks. So I believe that circumstantial case is proving why would the Prime Minister and his office, so we're talking about people like Gerald Butts, Katie Telford, Ben Chin, and others, why would they stand in the way of reforms that are being recommended and are, Harrison, I'm going to tell you, I understand people like Marco Mendicino, who's not a cabinet minister anymore, would be supportive of these reforms, and yet Trudeau and his office have not done them. The only real answers that I can point to are that they don't want to, I'll just use a slang word, piss off their donors who are going to be case one on the foreign agent registry if it goes through. They're not going to want to step in the way of people from China, but also the Iranian guards that want to keep those donations going. I believe that's the case here.
It's incredible. It seems as though, of course, that it's working for the Liberals. They're in power, so why would they want to end the party? Now, you took a major step in your reporting to name two politicians, Han Dong, formerly of the Liberal Party, and Vincent Ke, an Ontario provincial legislator formerly of the PC Party. Both those politicians have been removed from their caucus. They are now sitting as independents. And yet I want to show the audience a clip of you testifying in front of parliamentarians, Liberal parliamentarians, who discredit your reporting and try to challenge you on the fact that you're not being accurate. Now, I know journalism. I know that an outlet like Global News wouldn't run a story like that if your sources weren't absolutely on the money, if you guys weren't certain by your reporting. I'll throw to that clip now so the audience can see how the Liberal MPs discredited your reporting at a testimony.
On March 22nd, you published an article with the headline, Liberal MP Han Dong secretly advised Chinese diplomat in 2021 to delay freeing the two Michaels. Do you stand by this headline?
I don't write the headlines, but I stand by the story.
How could you, with any degree of journalistic integrity, publish an article that is sheerly just based on unfounded allegations?
The article is based on going back to my opening statement for the honorable member, and I'll reiterate it again and again. The story stands. I will not speak to identification of sources. I will not speak to editorial processes, and I want the member to remember, I will not speak to legal processes surrounding this story.
National Security and Intelligence Advisor, the Right Honorable David Johnston, the Director of CSIS, deputy ministers and ministers all confirm that the headline that you published as a part of that story was demonstrably false. So did you knowingly mislead Canadians.
We're definitely here today because of a story that you published, and that's what brings us here. So I really wanted to make it more clear. Do you think you possibly could have gotten it wrong?
No, the story stands, and the legal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable. You've taken this step to name these politicians, and the Liberal MPs are trying to discredit your reporting there. I guess they're trying to save their own political skin, but that's a major step to name two politicians. I guess my question for you is, how did these people end up into legislatures and into the House of Commons? Was the federal government not warned? Was Doug Ford's government not warned in advance that these people were potentially dangerous?
Well, Harrison, because there are 3 current legal actions involving, my reporting, I need to be very careful here. But what I can tell you is that you're correct. You understand investigative reporting at a high level, especially on sensitive stories, is vetted for many reasons. One of the reasons could be that people that come forward are facing, as I and the Globe and Mail have reported, potential prosecutions under the Security of Information Act. The people, these very, what I would call, patriotic professionals, very learned people, do not lightly come to reporters and show them documents that could put people in the government in a lot of hot water with the law. They take that step with a lot of consideration. And as reporters, I'm sure the Globe and Mail too have a lot of considerations that the reporting is accurate and it's in the public interest of the Canadian people. So since you played that clip, I will comment that just as I did in that hearing, I said I have very strict limitations on what I can say because of ongoing legal cases. But in response to, my treatment in that hearing, I do think I was asked to testify that day based on my knowledge of attacks on Canadian politicians from a foreign power. I answered the call of duty, prepared to answer that evidence, and some MPs from the party that is apparently most implicated wanted to try to discredit, as you say. They failed, but I came away from that with a very, let's just say, I want to be very careful. Let me put it to you this way. I've told others, and now I'm going to tell you. Several days later, national security officers from the RCMP knocked on my door and said they had a legal duty to warn a Canadian reporter that has been reporting on Chinese interference issues that they could face some risk consequences. I'm going to leave it at that. So I answered my call of duty to give evidence. I was attacked, I will say unethically, by some MPs. I'll say it to their faces. I'll say it in law. And then I was warned by the RCMP that, you must be reporting something pretty powerful and accurate because some people want bad things to happen to you. That's about as much as I'll say now. I think at a later point, I'll be able to speak more on names and, what kind of threats I may face.
Of course, and we hope you do, absolutely. Now let's just zoom out a little bit. So I find that this AUKUS, Australia, UK, United States agreement, says a lot about where our allies and what our allies think of Canada and think of our security as a country to work with. This is a major, major story that is really damaging Canada's reputation. How do you think this has impacted Canada's reputation among our allies, what they think of Canada, and what they think of where we're at here, our security, how we can keep intelligence safe? Because I find that development between Australia, UK, and the United States is a real sign that they don't trust Canada as a reliable ally at this moment. What do you say to that?
I think I do believe cases such as the Cameron Ortis trial, which I've reported on, no one can argue that the Canadian intelligence, law enforcement, the RCMP have been irreparably harmed by cases and concerns surrounding Ortis, which could go a lot deeper than what has come out in his trial. I do believe that on some level, you just look at Canada's military spending and you can see that our capacity has been severely downgraded. You can look at Mr. Trudeau's response of not putting in place the responsible foreign interference laws that his own bipartisan panel has recommended to him. You can look at the reporting of myself and Bob Fife and Stephen Chase that points to willful blindness, dereliction of duty, allegations that still have yet to be tested in court or in hearings, if those hearings really want to get to the bottom of them. I do think the picture, as I have heard from people inside government, is that, yes, we're not trusted anymore. We're seen as a lightweight. Let's just put it simply. Australia and Canada could be very similar nations. Canada is the G7 nation, yet Australia is the trusted ally of the powers of the G7. Germany is starting to step up and pull some heavyweight internationally and take some hard, but I believe right decisions. Let's just, not to get off topic, looking at what's happening in the Middle East. Right. Canada isn't. Across the board, a lot of people politically could disagree with me, but what I'm hearing from inside is Canada is not trusted. It doesn't have the capacity legally and law enforcement wise to deter these very serious threats. And so our allies are now holding back. We're not being invited to the adult table. And I'll add here, some of these so-called intelligence academic experts in Ottawa, would try to say about AUKUS that, oh, no, it was just because we don't want nuclear subs. That's why we're not invited. No, these are like Prime Minister office friendly academics that are just making excuses, I believe, for this government that is seen more and more as an afterthought at best.
Right. We're talking about our allies here, and obviously Canada is not the only country that is the target of Chinese interference, of other hostile nations that are trying to interfere. Obviously, other countries are involved in this too, the United States being one, and Australia, as you point out. What has the United States done to protect their intelligence, their infrastructure, and to prevent this infiltration and this interference?
Well, the United States, I more and more I read documentation from the U.S. Department of Justice or cases coming out of the Eastern District of New York Attorney's Office, the FBI, the DEA. The U.S. has powerful law enforcement intelligence institutions. And again, they have the Foreign Actor Registration Act. And it's very simple. All the cases I read about illegal Chinese, transnational repression, illegal Chinese police stations, operations using, let's just say nefarious proxies and Chinese intelligence to target artists, to target politicians, to target dissidents in the United States. We're learning about those for two reasons. The U.S. has a Foreign Agent Registration Act to prosecute the proxies that China uses 2 or 3 steps of insulation between their powerful intelligence officials in China and Hong Kong that sometimes travel to the U.S., sometimes not. But in all cases, they've got the distance of using these proxies in the diaspora. The U.S. can convict those proxies with their laws and their powerful law enforcement agencies. And they're looking at increasing the power of their foreign agent law. And yet in Canada, we're not. So the U.S. faces, I believe, the same threat networks from India, from China, from Iran, from Russia, and yet much less powerful. These networks are less powerful in the United States because they know Uncle Sam has the hammer. They know Canada is a pure weakness. And so they're set up more strongly in Canada to run their operations. And as we've said, Australia responded and has upped their laws. So it's going on all across the world, but Canada is a hot spot because we're weak.
Interesting, very interesting. Because I noticed you had a report in the Bureau about how Canada is seen by these hostile nations as the hub for all of this bad activity because it's so easy for these countries to get involved. And it's not just through political interference, right? It's also criminal gang activity that also benefits these countries. And you've done a lot of reporting on Chinese Mafia involvement in Canada and how that interacts with the United Front. Maybe you can just briefly talk about how not just the political interference side of things, but also pushing forward criminal activity also will benefit the Chinese government, and how they benefit by involving not just, again, like I said, not just the politics, but criminal gang activity.
Yeah, it's such a huge, complex story. I probably got a second book in me, but very simply, the Chinese government doesn't want its PLA or Ministry of State Security officers always in the United States or Canada with hands-on, beating up dissidents. They want organized crime and dirty business persons, or anyone. They'll use anyone in society. They'll use former police officers. It's not racial, ethnic, or anything. They will use anyone they can get their hands on. But most specifically in my research, at a high and powerful level, they use the Chinese Mafia to run police stations in Vancouver and Toronto. They use the Chinese Mafia to run casinos where corruption can occur. They use mafias to transmit election interference funding and donations. It's simply about proxies. And so anyone can be a proxy, but when you're using high-level fentanyl traffickers, money launderers, casino operators as your proxies, this is why I argue that Canadians need to know a lot more about the dirty specific details of who they're using and why. And I'll add, it's very interesting that a United States indictment that was just unsealed in late November showed that the Indian government, in its brazen assassination efforts against, Sikh separatists, which, by the way, aren't often very good people themselves, are also involved in, political activity, organized crime activity. But the Indian government is using organized crime to target those people that it fears are terrorists. And I'm writing now again and again that it's the same when you're looking at the Chinese threat networks, the Iranian Guard networks, Russia, these kind of countries that, we increasingly harass and face the risks of wars spreading across borders. Hostile state activity is happening inside our countries, but Canada isn't responding for two reasons. We lack the power to combat these criminal networks that are used as proxies. And again, we lack those foreign interference and proxy agent laws.
You touched on India, and I want to get into that. You recently published a report in the Bureau about how the Indian government was involved in promoting a conservative leadership candidate in the leadership race and undermining another candidate. I'm sure there's more details into that, but touch on that a little bit about their involvement, in particular in the conservative leadership race. I know my audience will be interested to hear more about this.
Yes, so I've been reporting, I believe, 4 or 5 reports now on a document called a CIS Intelligence Assessment that I reviewed, very recent, October 2022. And again, I'll stress the point that this document shows that the Chinese interference, also Indian state interference, is so broad, it goes from municipal to provincial to federal, and it targets leadership contests. What's important about the document is the diaspora. We have great, loyal, productive diasporas in Canada that came to Canada for the benefits of our freedom and, our distance from hostile political forces. And they are now being, leveraged and targeted in many cases by China, most prominently, and India. So jumping, to the focus of your question, yes, this document shows that a federal political party in 2022, an Indian government proxy agent said, according to the CIS evidence, that the party's leadership race was targeted. As you said, one candidate, we know that it's a male, we don't know the name, was told, you can't come to these diaspora events that are connected to the Indian consulate. In other words, they're trying to gatekeep between the voters and the candidates and put the Indian government in the way. And in the other case, an unidentified candidate, memberships are purchased to support them. And as we both know, both the federal Conservatives and Greens had leadership races, but all of the evidence I read in this CIS case study fit the Conservative Party. So it's demonstrating that leaders are targeted. It's not just elections. And again, let's remember, it's only the 2019 and 2021 federal election that they're looking at in this interference commission. But as I've said, this case of India's influence allegedly with the Conservative Party is one. Another case points to two individuals from China that are said to control a federal electoral district association. And so this shows that, that they were trying to allegedly get candidates approved by trading support for some unidentified leader. And the other point is these individuals were already active at provincial politics and federal too. So the CSIS case study says this case demonstrates how this influence starts, in the riding level, and it just goes all the way through Canadian politics, top to bottom.
Incredible. Incredible details of just how serious this problem really is. Just as we wrap up, I want to ask you what's on your radar right now. I know you're really focusing in, as you say, on uncovering what the Indian government has been up to in election interference. But is there anything else that you're working on that you can let our audience know to look out for?
Sure. I'm working on a primary source investigation that came from a Chinese Canadian who was involved in private Zoom meetings in 2021 that involved the Justin Trudeau appointed Senator Yuen Pao Wu. Some of your listeners will know Mr. Wu has been, very let's just say, interesting in his political advocacy. His very first speech in Senate was taking the position of China on the South China Sea. Harrison, as you know, right now, when we look at events in Taiwan, it's very important to understand that the military activity in that area of the world on the seas is of huge interest to China, Taiwan, the United States, Australia, United Kingdom. Again, Canada's not at the table, but we still have a good military that would like to be involved. But look, I'm looking at Senator Wu's activity openly and behind closed doors. Remember, it's reported that he will be an intervener in this commission. So I will give you the tip, and your listeners, look out for some secret tapes obtained by yours truly, and what they reveal about whether Mr. Wu could have any, undeclared interests.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, the last question I have for you, Sam, is about just independent journalism in general. You left Global News. You were you were involved in the mainstream media for many years, but you've launched the Bureau, an independent investigative outlet. I want to ask you, why did you feel the need to do that, and what was the reason to try and to launch your own outlet?
The primary reason was that my book, Willful Blindness, in 2021 was so successful. It was really a life, the reporting experience and rewarding reporting experience of my lifetime. It debuted #1 Amazon in Canada. It's been critically acclaimed. It's being read in Washington, D.C., over in London. Any number of very, credible think tanks and academics around the world, high-level former U.S. justice officials cite the book, and yet Canadians a lot of them loved reading it. It was very detailed, but some very interesting and juicy stuff too. So my thought was, if I can reach that level of influence outside Canada with that type of reporting, let me do it on a daily and weekly basis on my own website, which is platformed on Substack now. But I have my own website if need be. It's already designed. And look, Harrison, I've never been more productive. I've never been more impactful than I have on this website. It's still building, and yet it's being cited by people like Globe and Mail columnist Andrew Coyne sometimes. So I do believe that, in some ways, you could say that I took a step down from, the front pages of Canadian media. In another way, you can say that I'm still doing the same work, but I believe in a more detailed, just as rigorous way. And it's at the cutting edge of what matters in Canada. And I want to report more broadly, as you know, on Taiwan, Germany, what's happening in the United States.
Incredible. I think I speak for my audience when I say that we're glad you've made that decision to go into the independent media space. It's really important for this country and for getting your work out there. Just quickly, before we let you go, Sam, where can my audience find your work? Where can they find you on social media?
So first and foremost, you can just Google www.thebureau.news or thebureau.news. I've got my own website address. That'll take you to my investigative platform. And so let's get more traffic going to there. Tell your friends and family. I do believe this website is making a difference already. And you can find me on Twitter at Scooper Cooper, where I also, I do a little bit of independent commentary that also points towards the Bureau website.
Amazing. And you can find the link to the Bureau.news in the description of this video. Sam, thank you so much for coming on. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us this week on the show. Reminder to let me know your answer to the comment question. Is the Liberal government compromised by the CCP? Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.